Next up, we have Gurjan from Devera Logic, and he's going to be talking to us about using ABAC with Accumulo.
Oops, sorry. Hi, everyone. My name is Gurjan Gerçek. The work I'm going to present is part of my PhD work. My supervisor is Stan Matvin. He's a Canadian research chair, also the director of Institute for Big Data Analytics at Dalhousie in Halifax, Nova Scotia. So, why we are doing this, first of all, we try to implement ABAC capabilities in Accumulo so that you can use those out of box. And while we are doing this, we try to keep the change at minimal because the system is quite complex and it's quite easy to create some defects or bugs. While we are doing this also, we need to support simultaneous use of CBAC so that you can use CBAC where needed and ABAC where it is required. Or you want to express more, you can use ABAC in your system. Another criteria was there shouldn't be any performance impact on CBAC so that we don't affect your regular usages while introducing this feature. And also, we need to support a controlled migration from CBAC to the ABAC approach. And the last one is also important. We are not doing this for a specific company or for specific tools so that you can use any kind of conventional open source vendor or service providers XACML tools with Accumulo. Why we choose ABAC? Actually, the security labels is very similar with the role-based access control in Accumulo, right? The problem is each cell has its own access control policy. I mean, it's a problem from, it varies according to your point of view, actually. What I'm trying to say is, with ABAC, we can centralize the access control policies in XACML files. Let's assume that you are using CBAC for the 90% of your system, but for the 10% of your important data is labeled with attributes rather than using the security labels. And all the policies govern those 10% data will store in a policy set, let's say, in a XACML file. And ABAC, again, compared to the role-based access control policies, we can provide dynamic policy implementation. You can use environmental variables in your system. Currently, you can also use such environmental conditions in Accumulo, but you need to implement some code for it. Also, attribute-based access control is the strategic access control plan for several government agencies, such as DISA, NIST. You can reach this information from their websites. And according to the Gartner research, in 5 years, they are predicting that 70% of the enterprises will be using ABAC in their access control process. When we speak about the cell-based access control in Accumulo, it's basically using the system iterator, the visibility filter. It evaluates the user security labels against the data's security policies and enforces the decision of it. It's a very simple and powerful feature, but sometimes it can introduce problems because each cell is mapping to a policy in it. I mean, there is a one-to-one mapping between the policies and the cells, right? When your security requirements change, when you need to update your policies, you need to update all the associated cells with it. And also about the environmental, also about the environmental conditions, let's assume that you want to limit the read request between the work hours. Then you need to create an authorizer for it, and implement necessary enforcement code in it. But when you are doing this, you are actually splitting your access control policy into two different locations. And if you want to, let's say, if you want to see your system's access control policy, you need to merge them before seeing the big picture. We have built our systems, our solutions on top of this architecture. We didn't make big changes in Accumulo. We just extend the visibility filter, which was a system iterator. In extended visibility filter, we have the visibility evaluator, which is actually responsible for evaluation of the visibility field against the user security labels. In addition to that, we add our XACML evaluator. You can think that it is a black box at the moment. And we also introduce different type of attributes, not only user and data, but also system table and external attributes. What's an attribute? Attributes actually is a metadata that define the characteristics of users, cell, and environmental conditions, basically. And you can think that the attributes are a special formatted security labels. It's not something new. They are handled as if they are security labels from the Accumulo's perspective. But let's say if you want to, when we look at the table, we can see the security labels, audit and finance, right? This is the current way of Accumulo's implementation. If you want to represent those values in attributes, then you will define them like in the example, like role, audit, department, finance. Actually, by doing this, you can also you can say that we can introduce the semantics about the data. The only thing that is required by our system is the attributes should be enclosed by curly braces. By the way, this is important. We are not replacing the security labels. We are just adding some capabilities on top of it. For simplicity reasons, for this presentation, we are assuming we can only store either attributes or security labels in a cell. Okay? As I said earlier, the user attributes are actually security labels. So, which means if you can store your security labels in an LDAP server, then you can also store your user attributes in your LDAP server again, or you can use your Zookeeper. You don't need to any other server for that. But on the other hand, when we are talking about the data attributes, we include the other fields of the key as attribute as well, which means you can use row ID, column family, or column qualifier in your policies as a variable, not hard-coded ones, as well as the visibility field content, of course. Okay, the dynamic part comes in with the external attributes, actually. By external systems, we are indicating a location of a user or the time of the time as an external attribute, or location as an external attribute, or the information you can fetch from your IDS or IPS systems. Let's assume that we can fetch information from your Snort IDS system. It will give, let's say, a threat level attribute, which indicates the security level of your internal network, okay? We can define with XACML policies or ABAC structures simple rules like, if threat level is higher than the medium, deny all read requests. By applying such rules, you can include Accumulo into your cyber incident response strategies. Another new kind of attribute is the table name and namespace. Actually, this is a work in progress. We are trying to finish it. By doing so, you can use the table names or even namespaces in your policies, so that you can limit a group of users. You can restrict a group of users from reaching for some specific namespaces or table names. You can use this to create more coarse-grained access control policies or more fine-grained access control policies. We talked about the attribute types, but one last thing is the request attributes. Those are temporary attributes we defined. By means of the temporary attributes, those are user attributes, by the way, sorry. Those attributes does not need to be defined. Defined by the root, or they don't need to be defined in your LDAP systems. They are just created for the specific sessions to provide some extra information into the access control policy evaluation, such as one-time passwords, right? You don't need to create them, but you need to verify them, whether they are really matched with the given user or not at the access control policy evaluation. Of course, we are in XACML, the attributes have namespaces or prefixes so that you can uniquely define them. Any attribute defines as any temporary attributes supplied to our system will be prefixed or will be used some specific namespaces, so that at the evaluation time you will be aware of that it's a temporary attribute and you shouldn't, it doesn't come from a trusted source. Again, we extend the visibility filter. Basically, what we have done is, as I told you before, adding a XACML evaluator besides the visibility evaluator. Why we have done this? We are just checking the content of the visibility field, whether it's a security label or an attribute. If it is a security label, we'll pass this information to the visibility evaluator directly, so that we don't touch anything, and Accumulo work as it's supposed to be. But if it's an attribute, we pass all the necessary information to our XACML evaluator. And also, when we put the attributes in the cells, which means we need to remove the Boolean expression out of the cell, right? So we are storing our policies, access control policies, on HDFS in order to distribute between nodes. Why we are using XACML? It's actually de facto for ABAC. It's a major OSIS standard. It exists more than 10 years, and it has 3 different versions at the moment. It provides quite. It's a flexible language. You can create quite complex policies with it, and also you can build. Anyway. And for XACML, there are different kind of editors exist, which provides you the administration productivity. You can simply create complex policies by using some kind of graphical user interfaces. We didn't use any domain-specific language in this part because we don't want to create different UIs for different capabilities, I must say. And another option, another feature is the interoperability. According to the XACML definitions, you could be able to represent all of your organizational security requirements in it. But let's say it can be include all the from physical security requirements to the data security requirements, right? And you can take only the data requirements part and supply it to the Accumulo, and it should run with it as is. And also, XACML has many open source and commercial vendors and implementations. If we look at the XACML architecture, we will see at the left side policy administration point. This is a centralized policy. I mean, this is the centralized point where you create, modify, or make changes on the policies. Then we will have the policy retrieval point, which is the abstraction layer for fetching the policies or for storing it and supplying it to policy decision points. The PDP is, the policy decision points is only responsible for evaluating those policies fetched from the PRPs. And if PDP cannot find an attribute that is not supplied with the request, then it will ask the policy information point that you can see on the right side of it. The policy information points is just a bridge between the external systems and between the external system and your current system. It has to know how can it communicate with the external system and retrieve the results of it to PDP. And lastly, the policy enforcement point is responsible for enforcing the decision of the PDP. Oh, by the way, when you are searching things about the XACML, the first thing will come up probably is the centralized access control model, which is true and not at the same time, because it's easy to implement it in a decentralized way, so which means we can scale it easily. One of the problems was we need to adapt this XACML architecture into Accumulo one so that we don't create some bottlenecks in order to introduce new features or capabilities. We just follow the shared nothing principles, and we need to for that we need to decentralize the XACML architecture, which means each tablet has its own PEP, PDP, and PIP, so that in order to evaluate the request, you don't need to communicate with a centralized PDP, or the PDPs does not need to communicate with each other. Actually, they are just like the system iterators. They can run as is. But of course, if you need some external information, then the PIP must connect to that attribute source or information source and retrieve that information. Of course, it will degrade the performance, but you can improve it by using caching mechanisms. For the first time, yes, it will take some time, but for the other ones, you can use that information again and again. Another good feature we implemented is the plugin structures. Currently, we are using the Balana project for the XACML engine. It's an open source and part of the WS2 project. But if you have a preferred XACML engine, which could be a commercial one or another open source project, you can easily replace it by implementing some wrapper classes. Okay. What are the benefits of our solution? Basically, we are centralized the policy administration. So if your requirements has changed, security requirements has changed, then you just need to update your XACML policy. But most probably, you don't need to update your cells if your attributes are good enough, because most of the changes can be handled by adding user attributes and updating the policy. You don't need to change or you don't need to add new attributes, but of course it's based on the requirements you have. As I said, we have different options on the XACML engine side. Either it's commercial or open source implementation. I could be wrong, but I guess DISA has its own PDP implementation as well. So if they like, they can also use it by implementing the wrapper classes. And another good thing is it reduced the coding requirement for enforcing the policy. You don't need to implement pluggable authorizers in order to use environmental variable. We provide an easy-to-implement PIP structure, so if you need an external attribute, you just need to annotate your methods. I will show a very simple example about it. And those annotations will automatically register your functions with the attribute ID that you annotate with it. Also, we are, by applying this solution, we will be able to supporting complex access control policies, such as privilege elevation. For example, it's a classical medical, classical example on the medical domain, right? The doctor should be able to read any patient's data in an emergency condition. In order to do that, it needs to supply the emergency code, which is a temporary attribute, actually. You don't need to assign it to the zookeeper or an LDAP structure. Or we can bypass policies for special cases, like if you have a breach, you can deny all read requests. Or you can introduce the relational constraints, like team manager can see data of her team members. Let's assume that on the column family, you have the team ID information in your schema. And by using this information, you can easily create some access control rules without the need of the external attributes. Also, as I said, we can take advantage of other key fields of cell for the access control policies. So you can bring your schema into the access control policies in it. Up until now, do you have any questions? Okay. Let's look at a very basic use case, doctor-patient confidentiality. A patient data can be read only by his or doctor, okay? And our assumption is currently the relationship between the doctor and the patient stored in an external system. This could be a REST API interface or in a MySQL database, whatever you prefer. We need to define a user attributes, which is the doctor ID. This is an ID of the external system, which maps to the current doctor. And also in the visibility field of the cell, we are storing the data classification attribute. Basically, it says responsible doctor only. It's just metadata. It's not representing the policy. We are using AND operator for backward compatibility. I mean, it doesn't mean anything. It's just a separator from the XACML evaluator part. And also, we label the patient ID to the cell. Okay, let's check the policy. This is XACML abstraction. It's not a domain-specific language, just an abstraction of XACML representation so that you can easily define or write policies with this language, and through the PAP editor of DevelopLogic, you can generate the XACML policies. As you can see, there's an attribute called isPatientDoctor. This is a derived attribute, actually. We didn't define it in the user attribute fields or in the data attribute sites. And in order to fetch this information, in order to provide this information to PDP, the policy evaluation process, we need to implement a simple function for it and use the attribute annotation with it. If you look at on the first 3 lines, you can see the annotations, attribute ID, and attribute type, which is basically registers this function with the attribute ID, ACME org sample medical is patient's doctor, and you also need to provide the type of that attribute to that annotations. Then all you need to do is fetch the doctor's ID, then ask your external system, get the patient list, and check the patient ID whether it's in the patient list or not. It's simple as that. The only thing is you need to return a string so that it can be evaluated by the XACML. That's all the code you need to implement. But of course, let's assume that we don't have any API or we don't have any connection capabilities to your external system, right? Then you need to, or you have some event-based information generation requirement. Then we need to use the PIP collector REST API. Virtually, you can write a program in any language that will fetch the information you need from your external system and supply it to the PIP collector. And then the PIP collector will push this external attribute information to the local PIPs. By using this REST API, you need to provide the attribute ID, attribute type, attribute value, and the other values as well. Yeah. As I said, it's just like the security labels on the user side. You just need to use the set auth command on the Accumulo shell in order to assign an attribute to a user. Currently, we are on the testing and documentation phase. Also, we are working on the performance characterization, but it's a tricky one because what we are doing is actually a skeleton, a framework that we provide. You can plug and play with your own preferred solutions with it. So we are also working on integrating the DeveraLogic PAP solution, which will be used the governance of the policies, integration solution, integrity checking, which you can use for conflict detection and solving them, as well as the performance checks on them. We would like to donate this code to the Accumulo's source code base. Also, we are seeking guidance about it, how we can donate the code and what kind of procedure we should follow. And also, we try to build a community around the XACML policies, as well as we are looking for security requirements that cannot be easily solved with security labels. And if you have any question, I can take them all. No. Sorry, I'm a little bit nervous, as you can understand. Sorry. Thank you. One last thing, we have also some bonus content here. If you like to get them before they put them online, just send an email to me, gurjan@deveralogic.com or info@deveralogic.com. I would be happy to send them to you. Do you have any question? No, it's just a separator. If you are talking about the attributes, yeah.
Just add on.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with oral?
Actually, you can use it. It doesn't matter. We're just splitting from them and using it with a different logic. We're passing this information to the XACML evaluation.
Right. So these are just, I guess, attributes, and then your policy will just check one by one.
Not one by one, but we are packing up together and send them to the XACML PDP.
Okay, so it's a list.
Yeah, exactly. Just a list of attributes.
So the parsers for the XACML are often quite complex, and in some other realms, quite slow. Now, I know you said that you were going to work on the performance analysis, but I'm sure you must have at least taken a very simple single attribute and run that through. Do you have a sense of how fast or how slow that is? And have you thought about what the scaling would be?
Actually, the scaling is not a problem because, as I said, each tablet has its own PDP. So they're not connected processes. You can scale them up. As long as you have more tablets, it will automatically generate it because it's the part of the visibility filter. We are mimicking, actually, we are mimicking the Accumulo's current approach for this problem. So we didn't introduce any new system in it. But on the sense of the evaluation part, yes, there might be some performance issue for parsing it. But for the evaluation, it's quite fast. I guess the Balana has some paper published about that, some performance benchmarking about that.
Thanks.
I just want to add one more thing. For the proof of concept tool, yes, we have used the communication over strings, creating the requests in a string and passing it to the PDP so that it would be easy to replace the XACML engine. But a well-known trick is that you can, rather than creating a string, you can make direct API calls to your XACML engine, so you will omit that string creation and parsing times. But it was at the moment just a proof of concept tool, so we will looking into those details. I mean, in order to, because we are, let's say, we are extending the visibility filter, we need to apply a patch for it.
So I'm recompiling the Accumulo. Do you need code patch? I mean, like that?
You can replace the, I guess it was the core jar file. If you can replace the jar file,
Yeah.
it will be okay for extending the visibility filter. Because the changes are very isolated. But about the XACML part, I mean the XACML engine, yes, you need to configure which XACML plugin will be in use, state the name of the class name, and you just need to upload the jar file which contains your XACML implementation or wrappers into the class path, and it will.
IBXD or whatever that is?
Sorry?
The live BXD or whatever that directory is?
No, I mean we are keeping those things separate. We just create a new folder and add it to the class path. It's not something hard. It's simple.
Okay.
Yeah.
Karshan, you're planning on contributing this to the main branch?
Yes. I mean, if possible, of course.
In a future release.
Or sorry?
It'll be in a future release, right?
Ah, okay. Yeah. Thank you very much. Any questions? Okay. I guess that's it. Thank you very much for your interest.